Hey, you're about to watch a sick interview coming up with a guest that I've brought on, and I'm just going to kind of let them do their thing. I'm going to let them do their thing. So I hope you can enjoy this. Just grab a notebook. Make sure you grab a notebook and a pen so that you can take notes. I'm not the one sharing stuff here. This is them. So let them do their business with you and coach you into something relating to marketing and teach you something new. You can learn from people from all different industries. So also hit the subscribe button and then hit a bell. The bell should pop up after you hit subscribe. That would just help me bring the subscriber number up. You know, I love that. And then it'll also notify you whenever new videos go live or new interviews like this go live. So make sure you do that. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right, guys, and do you go by Dave or David?
Dave's fine. Yeah.
Dave? All right.
Yeah.
All right, we got Dave here. How's it going, Dave?
Pretty good. Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good. Hanging in there. So yeah, give us the rundown. What do you do? And you were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I want you to tell everyone and maybe go into a little bit more detail as to what you love about it and all that.
Yeah. So now I am the president and COO of Bamboo Earth, which is a direct-to-consumer skincare brand, natural skincare brand. And just prior to that, I was the VP of marketing at 4x400, which is a holding company, DTC brands. And back about 6 months ago, we decided to narrow down to just one of our brands and focus in on Bamboo specifically. So I've been moving more and more in the direction of spending all my time on Bamboo. We sort of made it official recently and have me leading the day-to-day operations of, Bamboo.
Cool. What got you into marketing in general? You were the VP of marketing. Is that how you started?
That is, yeah. So I jumped right into e-commerce, believe it or not, right out of college. So actually I was in college, about a junior. I was a junior. And my dad at the time owned a business and had a new invention he was looking to bring to market. It was a backpack that had like air in the back of it. You actually blew it up and like the back was like padded with air to be kind of softer on the spine, so to speak. With like we were at that time, we were really concerned about kids carrying heavy bags. A lot of that's been replaced by tech lately, but at that time it was a real problem. And that was 2006. And yeah, 2006, and Google AdWords at the time was just obnoxiously new and cheap and like 20-30 cent clicks. And it was just so cool. I just jumped right into it. I was like, oh man, I could go right after this keyword. And then it was an auction system. And I remember staying up to like 4 a.m. the first night I found it out, just grabbed by it. I was a marketing major, but until it was something real and like tangible, like, oh, I'm putting money in and we're getting money out. This is really cool. So I guess first jump in was media buyer, extremely amateur media buyer in 2006.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so I've been in e-com marketing pretty much exclusively since.
Yeah, that's great. And my dad would have bought that backpack for me growing up because
I love it.
I immediately thought of my dad and he was like, why are you putting all those books in that backpack? You're going to break your back. And I'm like, no, I got to have everything. But
that was the demo, concerned parent.
Hey, that's awesome. Maybe you should pick that back up again.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
That's hilarious. That's awesome. So
ad costs have gone up a little bit since
just
2006. Yeah.
So what have you shifted your primary focus to when it comes to media buying? What are you doing mostly now?
So now I'm spread across the organization. I am still acting as the media buyer inside the org. We're pretty Facebook and Instagram heavy. We've dabbled a little bit in we've always had a little bit of Google on there, TikTok and a little bit of YouTube, but we're really deep on Facebook. Instagram is the main acquisition.
Sure. And then Bamboo Earth, how long has that been around?
I want to say it's close to 10 years that the founder Amber has been doing it. Personally, I'd have to go back and dig up the like when she actually incorporated it and whatnot. So we 400 actually prior to me being there acquired the majority stake in the business back in 2019 and started growing the business since then. And that's really where it went from a very small time operation, like probably less than 100K trailing 12 months to a real DTC business that's on the map and scaling.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to broaden the horizons a little bit. You sent me a list of a couple things that you've kind of that's been on your mind recently, and I wanted to digest a couple of them with you to like see what you've been thinking about. The first was cash flow management that I wanted to talk about. So, what systems have you found to be the most efficient when it comes to that? When it comes to like Bamboo Earth, how have you? And that'll it might tie into forecasting a little bit, but yeah, can you just start talking about that and we'll see where we go from there?
Well, it actually, yeah, definitely does tie into forecasting a little bit because so I'll back this up. So 2 years ago, stepping into 4x400 in 2020 around early, let's say, I think it was September. Yeah, September 2020 when I started at 4x400. I'd been on the agency side for a decade. So I spent 10 years on the agency side. So I had a lot of breadth, in terms of marketing, working on lots of different industries, some B2B, some B2C, some direct to consumer. Some more traditional retail. So seeing like a lot across the full spectrum for marketing. But then stepping in-house I got to let go of a few things, like clients I didn't like, and like that whole side of it, and needing to put together reports I didn't believe in, like that whole that kind of side of it. But anyway, stepping into the brand side, all of a sudden new concerns popped up, which is you have to plan inventory, you have to work around actual inventory, like the reality of what you have. If you're forecasting too much and all your cash gets sucked into inventory, and now you're quote unquote cash poor but inventory rich, forecast too little, you're going to run out, can't hit your numbers. So there's some trouble around that that can be created in the brand side. And the whole dynamic between, I had a thread about this on Twitter. It's one thing to understand that your income statement or your P&L is on an accrual basis and like mentally like, okay, I get that. And that cash is different. Like, and it's another to develop what I would say is like the instincts or habits that understand that like immediately and digest that difference behaviorally. And again, I knew academically, like accounting really was never difficult for me as a subject. I did okay in it at school. I grasped it, but I knew that from an academic standpoint. But to develop the instincts to understand the difference between cash flow and P&L profitability is definitely something that took some learning for me. So yeah, cash flow management has been a big thing that we've been thinking about lately. And in particular, so forecasting does tie into that. So we do run a 13-week cash flow forecast where we have every week plotted out what's the money coming in, what's the money going out, starting balance, ending balance, right? But the two biggest inputs into that is how much are we going to actually collect from Shopify, Amazon, et cetera. So your money in, and how much are we going to go out, in particular ad spend. Like we can plot out vendors and plan that out relatively with a relatively high level of confidence. Sometimes you get a little bit surprised by bills, but nothing order of magnitude of the level of that you can get surprised by a bad, AMER or CAC for a given month. And then, oh my God, we just spent how much on ads, or we weren't able to bring in how much revenue. So missing on revenue or ad spend totally changes that cash flow forecast. So that's your forecast that is the reality of the money that you have to pay your bills, to bring in more product, to keep hitting payroll, all the things that you want to do as a business. That cash flow forecast is ultimately the reality of it. And those two biggest inputs, revenue and ad spend, were really a new muscle that I needed to develop much better this year. So I worked with Taylor Holiday at CTC, and in the beginning of the year, we adapted one of their the templates that they use, their growth map. And we'd always had a variety of different ways of projecting future revenue. But this way, adapting kind of the way that they used really fit well with our organization. So previously, if prior to working at 40400, if you asked me to predict revenue, I probably would have tried to add up channel revenue. Okay, here's email revenue, here's this. What I do think is a more stable means of getting there is thinking about it as your customer cohorts. So we think about, okay, you've got your new acquisition, like your new customer acquisition, and that's your most volatile piece. That's the most least predictable month to month. So how are we going to go do out in the market, basically? Like, so I'm going to go give, Facebook 300 grand, 400 grand, whatever, this month. What am I going to actually see back on that? Or am I even going to be able to spend $300,000 or $400,000 at my, target goals? So that's that acquisition piece. The other cohorts here are actually much more predictable, and getting a stable base in my prediction really helps. So acquisition, that's always going to be volatile. That's always going to be some function of what are we spending? What are we getting back in return? The next two levels are, okay, last month we acquired $500,000 in new customer revenue, let's say. What is that worth to us this month? So it's a recently acquired customer cohort. And what I like to do is take like the last 6 months and say, the onboarding of a customer, especially in skincare, this is especially true for consumer packaged goods where people are using the product and actually depleting it and then needing to go back and replenish it, right? I do find it is still true for hard goods as well, though. New customers have a somewhat predictable behavior over their first 6 months, especially based on what they came in purchasing. So for us, they came in purchasing one of our personalized kits. They're sold as minis, meaning they last about 2 weeks. I know that in about, they could stretch it to 3, maybe 4, but within 4 weeks, you're out of the product. You either haven't been using it or you're out of the product, right? So there's a relatively predictable rate that our customers are going to come back and repeat. Okay. And we could track that and try to improve that specifically and focus in on that. But that way you can look back at your prior 6 months and say, how did we do over the last 6 months? Use those predictable percentages to build out that segment of revenue for your future month. And that you can actually predict with a pretty high degree of accuracy. Okay. And then the second layer, or the third layer, I should say, the second retention layer that we look at is non-recently acquired customers. So your active customer file, besides those that you've just acquired in the last 6 months. Okay. So you've got, and I always keep a look at, like, for Bamboo Earth, it makes sense for us to look at about 180-day active file. So in the last 180 days, who has placed any order? And I'll exclude the recently acquired and those onboarding, whatever. So those that just keep coming back and placing orders, what does that file look like? And what percentage of them typically come back and repeat in a given month? And again, that's actually reasonably predictable. Some months will go down a little bit in terms of percentage. Some months will fluctuate up, a little bit of seasonality in there. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you might flex upward from 25% to 40% or something like that.
But you're saying you exclude the people who have been acquired within the last 6 months?
So yes, typically I want to look at this as 3 layers.
Okay.
You can look at it as a percentage of overall customers, which is what I do, which is actually the way we build the growth map today. But when I try to drill into the metrics and really look at it, I actually want to remove that because I want to look at these as 3 distinct segments.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So using this method gets us to a revenue amount. Certainly those 2 retention layers gets you to a base that is a relatively stable base that you can predict and say, okay, this 40% of my revenue, 50%, 60%, depends on how hard you're going on acquisition, is this relatively stable base that I can predict with a relatively high degree of certainty. Then I'm going to go layer this like uncertain portion on top of that. And I'm going to ultimately come to my total prediction, right? And you want to get better at putting that uncertain layer on there, and hitting that number. But ultimately, taking this route instead of trying to go completely from the ground up or try to do top down, meaning like some companies will look, okay, well, what did we do in June last year? We've been pacing about 20% off. We'll just keep doing 20% off. All right, put another 20% on the books. And it's like, well, how do you get there? Like one thing I don't like about just taking a year over year comp and applying it looking forward, like, okay, we've been up 50% year over year. Let's keep projecting 50% year over year. Well, why have you been up 50% year over year? And is that going to persist? And understanding those mechanics of your customer file and your acquisition. So like, are we going to be able to acquire as much as we did last month? Are we going to be able to acquire that 50% more year over year? Okay, good. What do our retention cohorts look like? How active is our customer file compared to what it was last year? Is the customer file larger, more active, blah, blah, blah. So looking at those inputs, you're able to build a ground up forecast that also bakes in the assumptions of what you're going to do this month. So it's nice because it ties the cause and effect of like how I create that to the projection, so that you have some level of responsibility saying like, okay, this is what I got to go put in if I want to get this out. That makes sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. You just summarized the whole thing perfectly. So can you say those 3 levels again? You want to view them each?
Sure. So newly acquired customers come in, first time order. Second one is recently acquired, just onboarding. And then the last layer would just be all-time customers that are active in your portfolio or active in your.
Yeah. So give us a real world example. Let's say we're coming up on Black Friday. Right. How would we look at this if we're, because we know it's going to be bigger than the past, 6 months, the average of the past 6 months, say we haven't run any holidays. How would you look at that? Or would you instead look at, would you pull in year over year a little bit more looking at that? How would you do that?
So I pull in year over year, but what I pull in year over year is the behaviors in those segments. So like, all right, let's look at the first one. So acquisition. All right, so we're going into Black Friday weekend, because like Black Friday gets highly seasonal. You have to like kind of drill into the week level rather than just the pure month level, right? So let's say you're doing November and you say, okay, the first 3 weeks, what does that look like from an acquisition perspective? Okay, so maybe the first 2 weeks you're really stalking. It's terrible out there. You're just gonna say, okay, third week we're gonna start to introduce some offers. Fourth week is Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We're gonna go smash it, and you look at what you were able to spend last year, what the ROAS, or I use AMER, which is just first time customer revenue over ad spend. So kind of some people call it blended ROAS or ecosystem, but I call it AMER. But regardless, whatever your efficiency metric is, here's how that looked last year, and here's how I think I can, what I think I can do this year. So you're taking it segment by segment. Segment 2, my recently onboarded. Here's how that behaved last year. Here's what the prior 6 months of acquisition were. And yeah, look, there's this big tick up in November because we did that offer that really like moves that revenue forward, right? Like, you placed an order 3 months ago and haven't repeated yet, but Black Friday, Cyber Monday is a great catalyst to an offer that forces you to repeat at a higher rate. So you take that seasonality adjustment in specific cohorts and then bake that into the projection. Does that kind of help clarify how to adjust for the seasonality there?
Yeah, I think so. And going off of all of that, how would you predict growth in the sense of we're starting the new year and we are setting goals to get to, get to this X amount revenue? How would you set those predictions Um, would you use kind of the same approach, or would you use a different approach? How would you do that?
No, I would use the same approach. In fact, we've done something similar where we say, okay, let's forecast out a year.
Yeah.
We want to go hit, X million run rate or X million trailing 12 months for the revenue for the year. So you've got that goal out there. And ultimately what this exercise is going to tell you is what you have to do from primarily an acquisition standpoint. If you're baking in too much movement from a retention standpoint, you're probably being overly optimistic that, we're going to go take, a 30% retention rate and turn it into 40%. Yeah, my guy, you're probably not. Like it just doesn't, it's hard to move retention unless you're really going to move it because you're introducing a product that, that hits that particular, to use a parallel here. Patrick Kodu runs supply. This is just easier for me to take as a parallel. Let's say he only had the razor and the refills, and he was now going to introduce a shaving cream. He might say, yeah, okay, that I have to account for that in a significant bump in my retention metrics because I'm introducing a new product that fills that additional demand. It is reasonable to assume some level of a bump in that, and that's how I'm going to ladder up to the year. But assuming you're not going to be doing something that is like foundationally changing the way you retain customers, you probably want to, maybe you're nudging those metrics a little bit saying, yeah, we're going to improve on it. We're going to really drill in on these flows, blah, blah, blah. But you're nudging them 10%, 15%. You're not 50%, 100%. So what you want to do is know that, okay, I've got my 6 months prior of my customers acquired. So I know my starting point is for those base layers. Now I'm going to go see what I have to do at that top layer in order to create the total top line that I want for the year, or total bottom line. It depends. Like you might have, I want to hit $1 million EBITDA. I want to hit a $5 million EBITDA. Like that might be the goal. And the company literally doesn't care about the top line. Maybe they do, So depending on what your goal is, you want to say, all right, top line revenue, we want to go get to $20 million this year, right? So we want to take, so these retention cohorts are going to behave this much better, 10% better this year because we're going to really put in the work and drill in on these kinds of retention, right? The onboarding process to make sure that they repeat a little bit better. And we're really going to hammer this, active customer profile. We're going to address churned customers and we're going to, really just hammer that. So we're going to bake in 10% improvement there. But I'm going to play with the acquisition numbers and see what I have to do to compound that growth throughout the year to hit my top line. Does that make sense?
A little bit. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. So, okay. So let's say I'm starting at a $10 million run rate. Like I'm sitting here, I'm doing about $10 million a year, right? And I want to get to let's say $15 million next year. Let's make some nice round numbers, right? So I want a 50% year-over-year increase. And so I'm currently acquiring, let's see what would be like a reasonable amount of acquisition for that. Let's say like 500K a month of new customers. So I'm doing 833. That's what gets you up to 10 million. 500 of that is acquired customers. So that implies 333 is the retained, right? So that's layer 2 and 3 combined. So if I'm going to get to 15, I'm not going to do that exclusively on acquired revenue. At least I hope I'm not. I hope I'm going to move the retained with it, right? So let's go start saying, okay, month 1, I'm going to go 550, 600, 650, 750, whatever. And then I'm going to see how those future cohorts respond, continuing to use the percentages that I have, saying we're still going to churn customers at this rate. We're still going to retain newly acquired customers at this rate. What are those? Now we started at 333. Oh, next month is 350. Next month is 370. And you're going to see that retention, ideally you have it looking like sort of this nice, smooth up curve where the retention is also building as a dollar amount, maybe not percentage of the pie, but as a dollar amount throughout the year with this acquisition. So you're going to plug in the acquisition numbers, see what that does in terms of retention with your model, and see where that lands you and say, okay, yeah, that's an acquisition plan that will get me to 15. No, that's an acquisition plan that won't get me to 15. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, that's great. More. Yeah, thank you for that. We're running low on time. I'm going to ask you one more question. Back to the basics. So If someone wanted to start a D2C business and wanted to make it as efficient as possible, what do you think the base layers that they need to establish are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so margins constantly come up. That you pretty much have kind of two ways to slice this. You make a bunch of money up front, or you make a bunch of money on the back end. And that's your spectrum, right? So like you have your supplement companies that are like, I'm going all back end. I might even do, somebody on Twitter was, back and forth yesterday. They extensively use a free plus shipping offer. Like it's literally a lost lead. I'm going to go make my money on the back end. Then you've got the other side of the spectrum where it's pretty much one-time buyers. I have to have my margin baked in, and I've got to make that money up front. So one, understand where you are on the spectrum. So are you, maybe you're making a good portion, 70% of your money up front and 30% of it on the back end. There's some level of a repeat. So I've got to hold the front end acquisition to this, ratio. So that's one, is understanding what CAC or acquisition you need up front, having the margins to sustain that, and understanding where you sit on this. I'm going to make all my money up front versus, I'm going to rely totally on LTV kind of spectrum. That would be kind of, to me, the price of admission. Like that's what gets you in the door. There's a lot of factors downstream from that, but if you can't make that work, essentially, like if you can't make the LTV to CAC ratio work at some level, you're not going to have a business. Like,
and what kind of margins are you thinking someone should have? I've heard 80%. I've heard that, like, that's high, but
right. I mean, I'm not going to say that, like, it's difficult because you could probably go in and find exceptions with anything. Like if you go into furniture, nobody is running 80% margins with a sofa.
Right.
It's not. Okay. So they're relying on a high AOV. They're relying on a high dollar amount in margin to be able to pay a large CAC up front. So let's say it's a $3,000 sofa and they're making $1,000 of margin on it. Might be somewhere around there, 30 to 50%, probably something like that. Well, they've got still a lot of, acquisition money to work with, even though it's not a high percentage. So I'm sure that maybe there's somebody listening that is in the furniture business and he's like, he totally misrepresented what I do. But I just tried to pull an example out of thin air that, like, it's a big spectrum. You don't necessarily need 80% margins. If we had to force 80% margins on furniture companies or, commodity type deals, they'd never exist as a business. It certainly helps to have 70+% margin, I think. And I, if I were starting a business, I would probably aim in that direction. I'd probably not want to work with a, 50% margin relying on the AOV to kind of carry me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's been a good time.
Thanks.
So where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Dave Rekuc, and they can also find me very sparingly on LinkedIn.
All right. Awesome. LinkedIn. Oh yeah. All right. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate you. Thanks for hopping on.
Right. Thanks, Alan.
Hey, if you like this video, you should like it, subscribe, ring the bell, and then go follow me on Twitter because that's where I'm posting all the announcements about stuff like this. So yeah, I'll talk to you later. Stay tuned for the next video.